Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. And today I want to talk about phishing awareness training because it doesn't work. Now, this got me really thinking about how we as humans actually learn and can retain knowledge. And so I'm going to dive into that. But the primer article on why we're talking about this by Sky Jacobs of TechSpot, I think is a rather important one because a new study of nearly 20,000 employees at UC San Diego Health is now really calling into question if we even need phishing awareness training. And so we've obviously seen a huge push among companies, governments, all that kind of stuff to educate our employees, our users, ourselves on how not to fall for scams. But the research suggests there may be little to no effect basically in preventing employees from falling for a phishing attack using phishing awareness training. This was an 8-month study. It was conducted in 2023, and it involved 10 simulated phishing campaigns targeting the staff across UC San Diego Health, which is scattered throughout California. Now, researchers sought to determine whether the standard annual training widely used across pretty much every industry actually enhanced employees' abilities to identify and avoid malicious emails. Now, instead of showing a gradual decline in attentiveness over time, as the researchers had expected, the results revealed no significant difference in failure rates, regardless of when workers last underwent training. So Grant Ho, who is an assistant professor at the University of Chicago, who co-authored this study, said, and I quote, "That suggests the mandatory cyber awareness training did not provide beneficial security knowledge to users," end quote. The researchers also found that employees who completed any form of training performed only marginally better than those who received none, with the average failure rates being reduced by just 1.7%. In other words, you took the training or you didn't, and they were pretty much all scoring the same, barely better if you took the training. The consistency of failure rates, even immediately after training sessions, suggested that the programs had little impact on changing employee behavior. And the findings did show, though, that interactive Q&A lessons, question and answer lessons, provided the most measurable benefit, but only if the staff actually did it, right? If you don't do it, you're not getting the benefit. And so, although completion rates were low, employees who finished the interactive training were 19% less likely to fall for phishing. On top of this, because so few workers participated fully, the effectiveness of the program remained negligible, right? Because if it's on your honor, you have to do it yourself, and a lot of them are simply not doing it. Here we are. Researchers also noted that those who completed the training may already be more conscientious, raising the possibility of personality traits rather than the material itself to explain that difference as well. So this article really got me thinking, and there was a lot more to that article, but those were kind of some of the highlights there. It's a great article, go read it. But I really wanted to understand this because what we are basically talking about here is repetition. Right? Now, it's repetition in phishing training. It's not necessarily the same phishing email. I hope not, like every single week, month, day, year, whatever. But the point is, we typically learn through repetitiveness. And so, are there any studies that basically show that learning through repetition is beneficial? And for the record, when I went looking, and I'm going to talk about one of these because I think it's the granddaddy of them all, there is actually a strong body of research showing that learning through repetition can be beneficial. But how the repetition is structured makes a huge difference. And so the evidence here for repetition being beneficial is simply that cognitive psychology has shown that repeated exposure to something actually strengthens memory traces. Each time, for example, you revisit something in your brain, neural pathways are reinforced, making recall much easier later. In other words, if you're constantly looking at something or going back and looking at the same thing over and over and over, it's like remembering something from 10 years ago that happened to you. Every time you remember it over the years, you're actually rewriting that pathway, which means you're kind of degrading that picture. It's like taking a picture of a picture, then taking a picture of that picture, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're constantly looking at, let's say, material that you don't have to remember from 10 years ago, it keeps it fresh, it keeps it more accurate. The practical effects of this are that studies on skill acquisitions, like learning an instrument, right, or getting really proficient or really good at a sport, math is another one. These consistently show that repeated practice improves performance. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, right? So overlearning, aka continuing to practice after you've already mastered something, has also been shown to help with long-term retention and faster recall. You put in your 10,000 hours learning the piano and you don't play it for 20 years, you're going to lose that skill, right? You might be able to pick it up, but you're going to have to retrain yourself in some way, shape, or form. But here's the thing, because we're not getting phishing training, at this company, at this frequency, right? Most companies that I've seen don't even do this monthly, let alone quarterly. I'm thrilled if they're doing it quarterly. Great if they're doing it monthly. So when is repetition less effective? And so if repetition is mindless, such as like rote reading without any kind of retrieval practice, basically the benefits of that are limited. Studies show that active recall, aka testing yourself, teaching, applying knowledge, combined with repetition is more effective than simply passively rereading something, even if you reread it over multiple times. Repetition without variation may also fail to build a deeper understanding. I've literally walked into companies where it's like, oh, it's the 15th, it's going to be phishing day, and then the phishing email is the same as it was last week or last year or last month, and it's like, okay, IT says change your password, click here, right? That doesn't help. You've got to vary these things up. So, for example, repeating math problems of the same type helps for memorization, but not for that flexible problem solving. So if I'm sending you an email that says IT, says click here to change your password, and you see that constantly, but now the next one is a fake Facebook ad that you should click, or an urgent thing from UPS or whatever, now you're starting to think outside the box. What are those indicators that would tell me if this is real or not? That's what we're talking about here. Now, masked repetition, meaning cramming or repeating the same material back to back in a single session. Think about that test you've got the next day in college and you've crammed all night for. It shows short-term benefits, but poor long-term retention, meaning you're not going back to that. After you've passed the test, you're not going back to that, where you're not keeping that refresher up. In the same way, if you stop playing the piano for a long time, you're just going to lose it. You may recall the information right after studying, but you're just going to forget it. So the question then is, what is the best way to learn here? That is actually spaced repetition, meaning repeating material at increased intervals over time. This method is actually really interesting when I started diving into it. It's been supported by decades of research, but it goes back to the 1880s and a guy named Hermann Ebbinghaus, and he created something, or postulated something, called the forgetting curve. This is really interesting because through the testing, where he would basically repeat, he would learn combinations of letters, like symbols, all this kind of stuff, where essentially he didn't have to think about it because he was repeating it over time more and more and more. What he learned was essentially that memory decays exponentially without review. The biggest drop-off is in the first hours and days. Meaning, if you are repeating this constantly and regularly, you're going to start retaining it over and over and over. That drop-off's not going to happen. You're not going to lose it if you keep up this pace. On top of it, repetition combats forgetting. So if you review material at carefully timed interviews, you quote unquote reset the forgetting curve and strengthen the retention. And so, if I'm looking at something once a day or twice a day and I'm repeating that process over and over and over, it strengthens it in my mind. And over time, it's something that I'm probably not going to forget. You've heard it like, oh, I'm going to say your phone number 5 times, and I'll remember it. That really doesn't work unless you're repeating that number, let's say like every day. When I get a new cell phone, or if I get a new cell phone number, it's going to take me a while to remember that number. Right? But at some point, I'm going to be repeating it enough to anybody that asks me for my phone number that I'm just going to remember it. That's what I'm talking about here. On top of it, the other thing that he learned was that spacing matters. Each review can be spaced a bit further apart. So you're reviewing by hour, then by 1 day, then by 3 days, then by once a week, then once every 2 weeks, and on and on and on. That leads to durable long-term memory. And so you've got that right out of the gate, where you're just going. And then basically, as you're starting to assimilate it, as long as you're coming back as touch points, you keep resetting that forgetting curve. So I remember when I was doing my 4 TED Talks, the first 2 especially, about this, where I had actually written the script out and all of this. And if you don't know anything about TED or TEDx Talks, they are very canned. You have a certain amount of time. I know to the second what my delivery should be and how much time I'm allotted at the TED event, all those kinds of things. And so I'd be driving around in my car at first, listening to a recording of myself delivering it the way I wanted to deliver it, as I would basically be repeating it back to myself. And then eventually I would just start saying it myself, right? And so I'm constantly repeating this. And I remember my second one was about 7.5 minutes, and I could nail it every single time at 7.5 minutes. And that's exactly what I did on stage, right? So that took me months and months and months of memorization. So when I got to the actual event, I knew it backwards and forwards. Now, nerves, all that kind of stuff aside, you get up there and you deliver, but the point is, it's in your brain stems, and so now you've got it. So here we are, and I think that's kind of where we're at, but quite frankly, phishing training doesn't work. We need to be repeating it more. That is the name of the game, and until then, I think we're in the same boat. It ain't gonna work. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please, please, please attempt to stay private, informed, and secure. Take care.